Hey guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I make my clear platinum silicone resin molds. I use this stuff exclusively. I love it for so many reasons. There's so many pros to working with this stuff. I've gotten a good amount of questions about this, so I am going to show you how I make these. The silicone that I will be using in this tutorial and that I use for all of my molds is this two-part platinum silicone. It's made by Tap Plastics, and it's a lot like epoxy resin in the fact that you have side A and side B. It's a 50-50 mix. You put half of this part and half of this part, you mix it up real good, and in a couple of hours it cures and becomes these molds I was showing you earlier. If you decide to try working with this stuff, just be mindful that it is temperamental. You can't mix it in paper cups and you can't mix it with a wood stick. Everything that comes into contact with it has to have no sulfur in it. If there's any kind of sulfur compound in it, it won't cure right. So that's something to be very mindful of. Another, I guess I'll call con about it, is the price point. It was very expensive. I started working with it, I don't know, maybe like 3 years, I don't know how long ago, it was a few years, and it was $50 for this and the shipping all together. And then when I went to order it again, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago, the price increased. So what used to be $50 for the product and the shipping is now $57. I'm not psyched about that, but it is what it is. I really love working with this stuff. So those are the cons. It's temperamental, it costs a lot, just be mindful. So since I have to be mindful about the stuff that I mix it and pour it with and all of that jazz, I'll show you the materials that I need for this type of thing. So I always mix it in one of these, let me cover the back so you can see that a little better. I got it at Walmart. It was probably like $4 or something like that. Super handy for mixing liquids like this, and you could see it's like 0.5 ounce, 1.5 ounce, so on and so forth, and it's super precise. So these are amazing for mixing the silicone in. When I'm making smaller molds, I have a little shot glass that also has those kind of markings, like it's 1 ounces all together, like there's, let me see, there's a ½ ounce mark, there's a full ounce mark. So I'll use that when I'm making a very small mold, and a lot of the times my molds are small, so this one probably gets more use than this one. Since I can't use wooden sticks to mix it, I will use a plastic knife, which is super cheap. I mean, you could buy a box of them for a couple of bucks. And then I also have this little spatula deal. You can order those online for not very expensive. Where I honestly got this was I went to like some gelato place or something like that, and it was a little taster spoon that I held on to. So yeah, there's that. You're gonna need clay if you decide to use this. One way to go about it is you can use hot glue instead of clay, and that's how I started off making these, and I just preferred this method a lot better. So just like with the other stuff, there can't be sulfur in this. Like, I suggest this particular kind of clay because when I first started out and I was experimenting, I figured, oh, you know, I'll try some different clays. And I tried polymer clay because I had some, and that was a bust. It didn't cure right. And then I tried random stuff like silly putty because that was around, and that was a bust as well. So those things apparently have sulfur in them. This does not. So this, it's really cost effective. I don't know why I didn't just buy it right away, but so it's plastilina. It's just modeling clay straight up. In any craft store, you can go to the clay aisle and it's there, and you could see like the price wasn't bad at all. You're going to need a plate. So this is mine. I got it at the thrift store, just like I get most things. It's very inexpensive. Here is a piece of this clay I was talking about that has been rolled out. And if you're gonna make these molds like I make them, you're gonna need a piece of clay that's been rolled out. I have a clay roller. You, of course, do not need a clay roller, but that's how mine looks, like so uniform. You can use a rolling pin, you could probably use like a cup, I probably could use this thing, what have you. So what you're just gonna need when it comes down to it is sulfur-free clay that is a sheet. So there you go. You're also, of course, going to need the piece that you want to turn into a mold. I'm gonna use this basic rectangle shape, and then I'm gonna use this oval shape. The oval shape actually came out of this plastic mold. Anytime I do still use plastic molds, it's just so I can make a piece to use as a masterpiece to make the silicone molds. And what I'll do is mix up my resin and, you know, just use a plastic mold how it's supposed to be used. Pop out the piece, and then I will glaze it very well with spray paint. And I like using clear spray paint because you get such a mirror finish, and there's no brush marks and there's no streaks or anything like that. If that's something that you would like to try, I have a basic spray paint tutorial for beginners, so go ahead and check that out and I'll show you how I do all of that. You're also going to need cutters, various shaped cutters, because what I do is we'll get there, but I'll set the piece onto the clay and press it down to get a good seal, and then just put the cutter around it and seal it up real well, and then pour the silicone into it. And I have a bunch of like crazy cutters that are crazy shapes for this type of thing, and that's why this rectangle, I have made a mold of it before, and that's why it's shaped like a pumpkin. Let me move that. Is because that is the cutter that I have that fits the piece well, and also I can use less silicone, you know, around the sides. Like say if I use this and then that does not fit. Hold on. Okay. Say I wanted to make this and decided to use a bigger cutter, that's so much wasted product around the sides. So the idea is to make sure that you have enough room on all of the sides to make a good sturdy mold, but that you're not just wasting the silicone, because as previously mentioned, this stuff is expensive. Now that we have all that information out of the way, I am going to go ahead and start the first steps of making my mold. So as I previously said, I got this sheet of clay and made it to where it's pretty uniform and all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pieces I want to make a mold of, and what I usually do is when handling it, I'm going to wipe it off to make sure there's no prints on it, and then when I set it into the clay, I'm also going to hold it into a cloth. And that's because this stuff really will pick up all the detail. If I left a big thumbprint on this piece and went through with it and made the mold and all of that, that thumbprint will be in the mold because this stuff is just so sensitive to the detail, which is really amazing. But yeah, I found that out the hard way. I've made a mold before and I was like, oh, this looks great. And there was just a print and it was just part of the mold and it couldn't be used. So be mindful that you don't want any prints, you don't want anything like that on there. So I'm going to set it into my clay. Make sure that when I use my cutter around it, that it'll all still be in the clay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to press it down really well. And I'm going to do that because I want it to look completely clean. When I pull this mold up off of this piece, like I want a nice clean line like that, that's not all jagged and weird. And that's how you'll get that, is making sure that the piece is very, very in there. So that'll be a very clean line when I take the silicone off of this mold. So now that I have that part all figured out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the cutter that's right for the job. And like I said, I have all kinds of weird ones. I have like pumpkins. I'm always looking out for new ones. Like here's a dog bone. There's like an Easter egg, whatever. So I know that this pumpkin works. I've made a bunch of these molds before. Like this one's a staple. So we're just going to go back with that pumpkin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up and you can see what's going on in there, and it looks like it's a good distance from all the sides. So now I'm going to push that into the clay just like I did with that piece. So now there's a very solid seal. Whenever I go to pour that liquid silicone in there, it will stay in there. It won't leak out and under and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So that will be just fine. Now I'm going to take this oval that I was talking about earlier, and I'm going to put it over here, I believe. Oh, and I shouldn't be touching it like that because, as I said, you can leave fingerprints and you will absolutely see them. Now I'm going to find my cutter that's an appropriate size, and I think it is probably going to be this circle. Yeah, okay, that one works. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line it up really good, and then I'm just going to press it down into that clay. So there we go. Those are now ready for the silicone, which we'll go ahead and do right now. Since we're making smaller molds, I'm going to be using this little shot glass measuring cup. So when I do this, I have paper towels handy because I want to be able to catch any spills off the side of the bottle or whatever drizzles down the side of the bottle as to not make a mess. So I got my paper towels, I have my little measuring deal, I have my stirrers that cannot be wood, have to be plastic. So we're going to go ahead and start measuring. Take your time with this and go slow and make sure that you're eye level with it so you don't overpour. And it's a 50-50 mix, so I'm going to go to the 1 tablespoon mark here, which is half an ounce. Okay, now I'm going to clean up the side of my bottle because I got some of the silicone on the side of it. I know it looks over poured from that camera angle, but if you look at it at eye level, it is at that perfect line right there. It's so important to make sure that you measure right with stuff like this and resin. Be as precise as you can. So we're going to go ahead and take our side B, the catalyst, and we're going to do the other half. I'm going to clean that off, put the caps back on them right away. You do not want this stuff spilling everywhere. I can imagine. I haven't spilt it, but I feel like it's one of those messes that you can't really clean up. So I'm going to take my spatula or my knife or what have you, as long as it is not wood, and I'm going to start mixing this up. You don't have to mix it for terribly long. I would say probably about a minute. And that's on the higher end. It starts to begin the cure pretty quick. So with a little bit of practice, like, it won't take long. If you're over stirring it or taking too long, you will start to feel that it's gelling up on you. So it's nowhere near the amount of work time you would have with like epoxy resin, where, you know, you probably have like a good half hour before it starts getting like crazy thick on you. This stuff, it's way quicker. So be mindful. And this stuff is really amazing. It's low viscosity, so any bubbles that you see in there will dissipate on their own. As the silicone starts to heat up and cure and do all of that, the finished product is totally translucent. So that's pretty amazing. I haven't worked with other silicones, but I do know that there's lower grade stuff that if you use it, you have to put it in a vacuum chamber to get the bubbles out because they won't do it on their own. And with this, that's not an issue at all. I really love this stuff, and I'm so glad that I discovered it and started working with it. So if you're on the fence about it, I highly suggest giving it a try if you're serious about resin and crafting and all that jazz. And the other stuff is fine too. Like, working with plastic is fine, and working with the yellow silicone is fine. It just requires extra steps to get a very finished looking piece. And with this, that step is gone. You don't have to glaze it. It pops right out, and it's so beautiful, and it's ready to go. So that's just, there's a lot of selling points with this stuff. Okay, so it's all mixed up, and it's already starting to thicken up just a little bit. Not crazy with it, but like I said, it doesn't take long. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to put it aside over there. And now I'm just going to pour this straight into the mold. And I'll usually go, or into the cutter, and I'll usually just go down the side and let it fill up. If you pressed the cutter into the clay far enough, you're not going to have any issues with it leaking out. Even if it does leak out, I've noticed that it'll start just a little bit on one side and it doesn't get all crazy with it. Like, you won't come back to it and the cutter will just be completely empty. So a little bit of leakage is okay. It's not really the end of the world. All right, so we got that good to go. Now I'm going to move on. Okay, so now we're going to leave all of that. Don't bother trying to clean up the knife or clean up the glass or anything like that. Just wait until the silicone cures, because then when it cures, you could just peel it right off. Right now, it's a crazy mess. So we're going to leave that. All of these bubbles you see are going to dissipate on their own, and we'll come back when the mold is finished and we'll pull the piece out and take a look at our finished product. So I'll see you in a little bit. So it's been a few hours and they're now hardened up enough to take them out of the mold. So I'll show you how I go about doing all that. So what you're going to do is just pull that cutter up and the clay is going to stick to it, and you'll see the cutout right there and all of that. So I'm going to pull that one up, and we're going to pull that one up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the clay off of the back. Alright, so we're going to clean that up, and I'll toss all that over there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to push the silicone out of the cutter. And you'll see how it pops out just like that. And there's a little bit of silicone that got up underneath the cutter when we were doing all that, but you can just rip it right off or cut it right off, and there's no harm, no foul with that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pop that master piece out. And there you have it. You see that nice glossy finish up inside of there? So I'm happy with this one. Let's put that aside, and we're going to do the same thing with this oval piece. So we're going to, well, let's pop, we can push this out first. There we go. Okay. So let's get the cutter out of the way. Now we're going to peel up that clay. Nice. And then we're going to pop that out just like that. And there you have it. So I hope this video was helpful. I'll leave information for where to order the silicone and all of that in the comments area. If you liked this video and it helped you, please like and subscribe and all of that stuff that goes with YouTube. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.